Welcome. We live? Yes, we are live. Welcome everyone to finally the technology is working against us like always. But here we are in I Need Living Conversations into the absence of the sacred, into the abyss of the system. We've been talking for this for 8 sessions now. And this is Sacred Blue Heron Woman who each Wednesday comes live with us to share these investigations from what's now called the Council House. Owl Council House. OWL stands for Our Wellness Lab, and it's an experimental lab of investigation on how to be well, on wellness and holistic wellness. And we've gotten to the point of understanding everything there is to that we need to integrate in order to reach a true liberation, a true state of health. So,
Well-being.
and well-being and etc. So to do that, we've been chatting with you guys for as 175 conversations, and now we are into this analysis of how the system came into being. So it's really interesting because we get to discover all the little details about the wars, about dictatorships, about how the system developed, and how nobody is really free from the system. Everybody, no matter where you are in the world, there's a story next to you. There's a story
Yeah,
nearby
absolutely.
about slavery, about imposition, about the same old corporations being the main players in this war, war god that we now identify very honestly. Let's be honest. There's a war god. We're worshiping a war god. We are under the power of a war god, and we
Yeah,
need to change that. We need to come into back to our holy mother.
yeah,
And here's our inspiration, our guide for that, and is Sacred Blue Heron Woman. And here we are in a new live conversation. So welcome everyone.
yeah. So tonight we're going to talk about the looting of Asia.
Okay.
What can your salary buy? Is it enough for room and board for most people? What all can you do with your salary? Well, in 1997, workers in Asia were facing a huge problem. Their countries were rapidly falling into what would soon become a full-fledged depression. The quote, Asian flu was what this crash was labeled, and was later upgraded to an Asian contagion when it spread to Latin America and Russia. Just weeks before it went all wrong, the Asian countries were being held up as paragons of economic fitness and vitality. The Asian tigers were globalization's most robust success stories. So one minute, stockbrokers were telling their clients that there was no surer way to wealth than sinking your savings into the Asian emerging market mutual funds. The next, they were cashing out in droves while traders attacked the currencies, creating a destruction of savings on a scale more usually associated with a full-scale war. So what began as rumor that Thailand did not have enough dollars to back up its currency triggered a stampede by the electronic herd. Banks called in their loans and the real estate bubble popped. After Thailand, panic spread and money fled from Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and even South Korea, which is the 11th largest economy in the world. The Asian governments were forced to drain their reserve banks in an effort to prop up their currencies, turning the rumors into reality. The market responded with more panic. In 1 year, $600 billion disappeared from the stock markets of Asia. In Indonesia, impoverished citizens stormed urban stores and took what they could carry. A Jakarta shopping mall caught fire during the storming, and hundreds of people were burned alive. In South Korea, TV stations ran a massive campaign calling on citizens to donate their gold jewelry so it could be melted down to pay for the country's debts. So in just a few weeks, 3 million people had handed over all kinds of items of gold, and yet Korea's currency continued to plummet. The suicide rate in South Korea went up by 50%. The spike was the steepest in the people over 60, with the older parents wanting to lessen the economic struggle on their children. This crisis was caused by a fear cycle that could have been arrested the same way the one in Mexico was, the tequila crisis of 1994, when a quick, decisive loan, proof to the market that the US Treasury would not let Mexico fail, was given. But no such move was made for Asia. Instead, as soon as the crisis hit, a surprising array of people from the financial establishment stepped forward with the message of "Don't help Asia." So the destruction of Asia's managed economy was actually a process of creating a new American-style economy. With their treasuries empty, the tigers were, as far as the IMF was concerned, broken and primed to be remade. Again, government services were stripped, basic services were privatized, and so on. And the IMF even set strict layoff targets in Korea. In order to get their loan, the country's banking sector needed to shave 50% of its workforce. In 1999, South Korea and Indonesia's unemployment rates had nearly tripled, and 20 million Asians were thrown into poverty during this period of planned misery. Women and children suffered the worst of the crisis. Many rural families in the Philippines and South Korea sold their daughters to human traffickers who took them to work in the sex trade in Australia, Europe, and North America. It was in this context that a senator named Madeleine Albright visited Thailand in 1999 and saw fit to scold the Thai public for turning to prostitution. She apparently saw no connection between the fact that so many Thai girls were being forced into the sex trade by the austerity policies for which she had expressed strong support. The IMF tried to help, it didn't work. And while it had failed the people of Asia, it didn't fail Wall Street. 2 months after the IMF came to its final agreement with South Korea, the scavenging of that country started. Within 2 years, the face of Asia was utterly transformed, with hundreds of local brands being replaced by multinational giants. It was dubbed the world's largest going out of business sale. It wasn't only private Asian firms that were being sold to foreigners. This crisis also forced governments to sell public services to raise capital. The US government had anticipated this and knew that Asia would be forced to accelerate privatization of certain key sectors, including energy, transportation, utilities, and communications. A decade later.
And we never ever knew this.
Yeah, I didn't either. This is why I think it's important. We need to know. We need to go through everything to understand that it doesn't, right? And the more we hear this, the more I've dug into this, the more I can tell you exactly what's going on right now.
Yeah, it helps make sense of everything.
Yeah. So a decade later, in 2009, Asia's crisis still wasn't over. With 24 million people out of jobs in a span of 2 years, a new desperation takes root that no culture can easily absorb. It expresses itself in different forms across the region, from a significant rise in religious extremism in Indonesia and Thailand to the explosive growth in the child sex trade. After the first 24 million, the layoffs continued, with the new foreign owners demanding even higher profits for their investments. In South Korea, a decade later, suicide was the fourth most common cause of death. That is the untold story of the policies the IMF calls stabilization programs, as if countries are ships being tossed around on the market's high seas. They do eventually stabilize, and that is achieved by throwing millions of people overboard. So the ugly secret of stabilization is that the vast majority never get to climb back aboard. They end up in slums, brothels, or cargo ship containers, or locked in a hotel in Panama.
And how many people go on talking about the economy and things like that, just repeating that same narrative of and they have to listen to this. Are you going to say the economy? Are you going to talk about the economy? when this is the economy. The economy
Yeah.
is,
Oh,
yeah.
so they are the
Shocking.
disinherited ones to whom neither the past nor the future belongs. So, like a prison interrogator, the IMF used the extreme pain of the crisis to break the Asian tiger's will and reduce their countries to total compliance. However, the CIA's manuals do say that the process can go too far, apply too much direct pain, and instead of regression and compliance, the interrogators face confidence and defiance. So in Indonesia, that line was crossed, a reminder that it's possible to take shock therapy too far, provoking a kind of blowback that was about to become familiar from Bolivia to Iraq. Free market crusaders are, however, extremely slow learners when it comes to the unintended consequences of their policies. So after 1998, it became increasingly difficult to impose the shock therapy style makeovers by peaceful means through the IMF bullying. Right? A new defiant mood coming from the South made its global debut when the World Trade Organization talks collapsed in Seattle in 1999. It was possible then to dismiss the breakdown as a minor pause in the steady advance of corporatism. But within a few years, the depth of the shift was undeniable. The U.S. government's ambitious dream of creating a unified free trade zone encompassing all of Asia Pacific was abandoned, as were a global investors treaty and plans for a free trade area of the Americas stretching from Alaska to Chile. So then we go into the rise of the disaster capitalism complex.
Mm-hmm.
In the 2000s. When Rumsfeld joined the cabinet of George W. Bush in 2001, it was with the personal mission to reinvent warfare for the 21st century, turning it into something more psychological than physical, more spectacle than struggle, and far more profitable than it had ever been before. During the 1990s, many companies that had traditionally manufactured their own products and maintained a large, stable workforce embraced what was known as the Nike model, which is don't own any factories, produce your products through an intricate web of contractors and subcontractors, and pour your resources into design and marketing. The alternate was the Microsoft model, maintain a tight control center of shareholders, employees who perform the company's core competency and outsource everything else. Some called the companies that underwent these radical restructurings hollow corporations because they were only formed with little tangible content left over. And Rumsfeld was convinced that the U.S. Department of Defense needed an equivalent makeover. So in a rare town hall meeting at the Pentagon, he said that the Pentagon bureaucracy was a serious threat to the U.S., meaning he declared war against the Pentagon. It wasn't that he wanted to save dollars. He had just asked Congress for an 11% raise. He was following the corporatist policies of big government joining big business to redistribute funds upwards. He wanted less money spent on staff and more money transferred to private companies. With that, he launched his war, and every department had to slash its staff by 15%. What do you think the date of this town hall meeting was at the Pentagon?
No idea.
September 10, 2001.
Wow.
Yeah. Does that leave you any doubt that the 11th was an inside attack on the Pentagon?
There's no doubt about that.
No doubt now. By the time the Bush team took office, the privatization mania of the 80s and 90s had successfully sold off or outsourced the large publicly owned companies in several sectors, from water and electricity to highway management and garbage collection. After these limbs had been chopped off, what was left was the core: the military, police, fire departments, prisons, border control, covert intelligence, disease control, the public school system, and the administering of government bureaucracies. Until now, disasters and crises had been a harness to push through radical privatization plans after the fact. However, now with the Bush administration, the core set had to be devoured. The crisis exploiting methods that had been honed over the previous decades would be used to leverage the privatization of the infrastructure of disaster creation and disaster response. At the front of the push to create a privatized police state were Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and George Bush. Rumsfeld had made himself a multimillionaire on the profitable aspect of a grim future misery planning, and Dick Cheney, a protege of his in the Ford administration. We just can't get rid of the Ford.
Yeah, it's going to be there.
That's why I'm never going to drive another Ford. Also made a fortune on the same. As the Secretary of Defense under Bush, Cheney scaled down the number of active troops and dramatically increased reliance on the private sector. A select group of companies was invited to apply to provide unlimited logistical support for U.S. military missions. An extremely vague work description. No dollar value was attached to the contract, and the winning company was simply assured that whatever it did for the military would have its costs covered by the Pentagon, plus a guaranteed profit. So this is known as a cost-plus contract. This was under the Bush Senior administration. So thanks to this loosely worded contract that Halliburton and Cheney had crafted when he was at the Pentagon, the company was able to stretch and expand the meaning of the term logistical support until Halliburton was responsible for creating the entire infrastructure of a U.S. military operation overseas. All that was required of the military was to provide the warriors and weapons. The result was on first display in the Balkans as a kind of McDonald's military experience in which deploying abroad resembled a heavily armed and perilous vacation package. Soldiers were met at the base with greeters, by greeters welcoming. It wasn't quite that bad in Iraq, but it almost was. And my daughter, when she deployed with the Navy, it was definitely not a deployment. She was put up in a 5-star hotel.
Your daughter was there too?
She went to Bahrain, not Iraq, but I was like, that's not a deployment. You can't even call that a deployment. That's a luxury vacation.
Which daughter? Chantal? Or?
Yeah, my older one.
Okay.
Yeah. Cheney saw no reason why war shouldn't be a thriving part of America's highly profitable service economy. Invasion with a smile. But only a totally imbalanced, disconnected from love person would be able to think like that.
Yeah, but that's out there everywhere. That's the mean. That's the state of vibration of everyone.
Totally
it's unloving.
Disconnected.
Yeah, total disconnect. That's it.
Yeah. So in the mid-1990s, Lockheed Martin began taking over information technology divisions of the U.S. government, running its computer systems and a great deal of its data management. Largely under the public radar, the company went so far that in 2004, the New York Times reported that Lockheed Martin runs a breathtakingly big part of the U.S. So do we truly have a government? No, we're run by Lockheed Martin.
By the military. Yeah, those are the guys that run everything.
Yeah, but they're not military. Lockheed Martin is a private company.
And the technology.
Yeah. So in Texas, George Bush Jr. didn't distinguish himself as a governor, but there was one area by doing anything special, but there was one area in which he excelled, parceling out private interests of the various functions of government that he had been elected to run, especially security-related functions. Mm-hmm. A preview of the war on terror he would soon unleash. Under his watch in Texas, the number of private prisons grew from 26 to 42, prompting a magazine to call Bush's Texas the world capital of the private prison industry. And on that note, I have to tell the story of my friend Jaime and the woman last weekend. He went to pick her up. She's a coke dealer, and he thought he could make money but it didn't work. But what I mean, he his son helped, and the inner work I did helped. But what all this that he's been going through has come from is the fact that last I knew he was supposed to go to court on October 18, I think it was, and he had been telling me, I had told him I'm going to go to court with you, and he kept putting me off. And he kept telling me there, my legal aid attorney is doing a good job. She's going to get me a deal. I think I'm going to get 10 years of probation, right?
Mm-hmm.
The day of his court case, it was raining, and I thought he might come by after his court case to see me, and he didn't. In fact, his phone was off the entire day.
Okay.
And I was like, what the hell is going on? And then I talked to him around between Christmas and New Year's, and he's like, oh no, everything's okay. And I'm like, well, you have another court date on January 8th, right? And he's like, oh yeah, that's about my Muskogee ticket. And I'm like, you're what? What? Jaime,
Mm-hmm.
what the fuck? Right? I didn't hear another thing from him, but he's been doing this thing of running to get out of his body, right? Running to use cocaine to escape.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell is going on with you, Jaime? And we finally talked last night after I did some more inner work and some Ho'oponopono healing with him and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that, unbeknownst to him. He skipped out of court again
Okay.
because he would have gone straight to jail. Now,
But isn't that a good thing? I mean,
it is. I'm proud of him for doing that, but now he's got warrants out for his arrest.
right. But if we would have went in, he would be
He would
arrested
have gone
already.
away for 6 years.
Oh man.
What? For what? For drinking. Why are we okay with sending people away for drinking?
Yeah, the system's going to get you, and if it's not one way, it's
And people don't understand this, Julian. And it wasn't until I talked to you and was telling you about when he got picked up by the game warden, and you were like, "What?" Right? And why is it illegal? No, it can't be illegal to drink. You're right. We as citizens have every right to drink and drive if we want to. It's
Mhm.
not until we take someone else's life in that process that it becomes anybody's business.
right. But then, yeah, the cops are gonna be nosing in, and just
Because prison is a privatized, money-making, for-profit business.
right, and they get incentives. That's why I was picked up just because I was walking at 2 in the morning on the street,
Exactly.
and without any, and I mean, if you want to go through due process, it's more expensive. It's more, if you want to defend yourself, I mean, it's like a bully, it's
It
a
is,
it's a big huge
right?
bully.
Are
I
we
mean,
are we
sometimes it's just better to get beaten than to defend yourself, because
and and everybody I've talked to tells about this. They're like, "Oh, well, Jaime shouldn't be drinking and driving." And I'm like, "You're totally fucking missing the point." Right? This is the same as you getting stopped 9 times for not wearing your seatbelt, and all of a sudden you're considered a felon and they want to send you to jail. Well, that same person would go, well, then you should be wearing your seatbelt. No, don't fucking tell me I have to make me a criminal because I don't wear my seatbelt. It's the same goddamn thing.
yeah, and that's something very hard to get into. I'm shocked at how difficult something like that is to come through somebody like a regular person's mind. It's like, then who's gonna control? You need to decide and control and make sure you're acting. I mean, and it's your decision to. I mean, if you're not wearing a seatbelt, it's not hurting anybody else. Um, you're not
Exactly. And if you're
hurting
drinking and driving,
anyone.
it's not hurting anybody else. I mean, it's like I said before, think about how many people drive under the influence of narcotics.
Right, and I bet, for example, so many accidents happen because they're not the only drug they're in is anger. And they're
Yeah,
like
exactly.
fighting with their husband or fighting someone on the car. I've seen that. Like, I've
Yeah,
seen it where they're fighting so bad on the car and they're driving. It's worse than if you were drunk.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but we focus on that and we consider it such, and we're willing to send someone away to prison
Yeah, and
just
then
for that.
and we know a lot about that prison business. I didn't know about Texas being the number one place for that.
Yep.
Wow, and I have a friend that lives in Texas now, in Dallas.
So Jose Pineda, the Chilean minister who had privatized Social Security under the Pinochet dictatorship, said, I knew immediately that Mr. Bush had fully understood the essence of my idea that Social Security reform could be used to both provide a decent retirement and create a world of worker capitalists and ownership society. So the first major victory of the Friedmanite counter-revolution in the United States had been Ronald Reagan's attack on the Air Traffic Controllers Union and his deregulation of the airlines. 20 years later, the entire air transit system had been privatized, deregulated, and downsized, with the vast majority of airport security work performed by underpaid, poorly trained non-union contractors. On September 10, 2001, none of that seemed to matter as long as the flights were cheap and plentiful. But on September 12, putting a $6 an hour contract worker in charge of airport security all of a sudden seemed reckless. When Bush stood with the firefighters and rescue workers at Ground Zero on September 14, 2001, he was embracing some of the very unionized civil servants that he was devoted to destroying. What happened in that period of mass disorientation after the attack was a domestic form of shock therapy. The Bush team, Friedmanites to the core, quickly moved to exploit the shock that gripped the nation to push through its radical version of a hollow government in which everything from war fighting to disaster response was a for-profit venture. Rather than the 90s approach of selling off existing public companies, the Bush team created a whole new framework for its actions. The war on terror, built to be private from the start, and 911 launched the disaster capitalism bubble. The Bush team devised a new role for government here to purchase security at market prices. So according to the Bush vision, the role of government is merely to raise the money necessary to launch the new war market and then buy the best products that emerge out of that creative cauldron, encouraging industry to greater innovation. Every aspect of the way the Bush administration defined the parameters of the war on terror served to maximize its profitability and sustainability as a market, from the definition of the enemy to the rules of engagement to the ever-expanding scale of the battle. From an economic perspective, they made it an engagement. They made it not a flash in the pan war that could potentially be won, but a permanent fixture in the economic architecture. Between September 11, 2001 and 2006, the Department of Homeland Security handed out $130 million to private contractors. So the disaster bubble has been inflating in an ad hoc and chaotic fashion since. One of the first booms for the Homeland Security industry was surveillance cameras. Over 30 million had been by 2007 had been installed in the US, and I'm going to guess that's probably double since then. Shooting about 4 billion hours of footage. So who's going to watch 4 billion hours of footage? Well, now we have a new market for analytic software that scans tapes and creates matches with images already on file. This created another problem then, because facial recognition software can really make positive IDs only if people present themselves front and center to cameras, which they rarely do. So another market was created for digital image enhancement. See, this is what we talked about with technology. It's not just one.
War is the only driver of technology.
Yeah. So with all the snooping going on, the government is drowning in data, which opened up another massive market in information management and data mining.
That's amazing to hear it like that, to know it.
Yeah, I know it, right? As high-tech firms have jumped from one bubble to another, the result has been a bizarre merger of security and shopping cultures. September 11 seemed to tell us that the fear of terror is greater than the fear of living in a surveillance society. As of June 2007, there were 500,000 names on a list of suspected terrorists kept by the National Counterterrorism Center. Another program, the Automated Targeting System, ATS, made public on November 2006, had already assigned a risk assessment rating tens of millions of travelers passing through the U.S. Anyone can be blocked from flying, denied an entry visa to the U.S., or even arrested and named as an enemy combatant based on info from these dubious technologies: a blurry image identified through facial recognition software, a misspelled name, a misunderstood snippet of conversation. If enemy combatants are not U.S. citizens, they will probably never know what it was that convicted them, because the Bush administration stripped them of habeas corpus, the right to see evidence in court, as well as the right to a fair trial and vigorous defense.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh.
So this is directly related to who's going to Gitmo Bay now. If the suspect is taken to Guantanamo Bay, he or she may end up in the new 200-person maximum security prison constructed by
The Bush?
Halliburton. If
Okay.
he or she is a victim of the CIA's extraordinary rendition program and kidnapped off the streets of Milan, or while changing planes at a U.S. airport and then whisked somewhere to a black site, the hooded prisoner will likely be flying in a Boeing 737, and Boeing has been acting as the CIA's personal travel agent since. So, right, all these illegal immigrants that Trump is sending to Gitmo, my heart bleeds for them.
Yeah, that's shocking. It's
because they're never coming out of there.
And what are they going to do to them? Oh
But they're
man.
torturing them.
Yeah. That's. I mean, we've known that's the place, the worst place to go.
Yeah. Over half the qualified counterintelligence experts in the field work for contractors. If these freelance interrogators are to keep landing lucrative contracts, they must extract from prisoners the kind of actionable intelligence for their employers in Washington. So it is a dynamic ripe for abuse, as prisoners under torture will say anything to make the pain stop. And contractors have a powerful economic incentive to use whatever means necessary to produce the sought-after information, regardless of its reliability. During the invasion of Afghanistan, U.S. intelligence agents let it be known that they would pay anywhere from $3,000 to $25,000 for Al-Qaeda or Taliban fighters handed over to them. Soon the cells were full to overflowing, and when asked why he thought he'd been turned over, Egyptian prisoner said, "Well, in Pakistan, you can buy people for $10. Are you kidding? 5,000?" So 86% of the prisoners at Guantanamo Bay were handed over after these dollar amounts were announced. In December 2006, the Pentagon had released 360 prisoners, and 205 of them had been cleared of all charges. It is a track record that is a grave indictment of the quality of intelligence produced by the administration's market-based approach to terrorist identification. In just a few years, the Homeland Security industry, which barely existed before 911, exploded to a size that is now significantly larger than either Hollywood or the music business. Yet what is most striking is how little the security boom is analyzed and discussed as an economy, as an unprecedented convergence of unchecked police powers and unchecked capitalism. Not only does it create an incentive to spy, torture, and generate false information, it creates a powerful impulse to perpetuate the fear and sense of peril that created the industry in the first place. What passes for debate about it is restricted to individual cases of war profiteering and corruption scandals, as well as the usual hand-wringing about the failure of government to adequately oversee private contractors. Rarely much about the broader and deeper phenomenon of what it means to be engaged in a fully privatized war that will have no end.
Wow.
And we have corporatism, big business and big government combining their combined. Ah, yeah, they're combing their powers too. They're combining their powers to regulate and control the citizenry.
Mm-hmm.
In the heat of the midterm elections in 2006, George Bush signed the Defense Authorization Act in a private Oval Office ceremony. Tucked into its 1,400 pages is a rider that went almost completely unnoticed at the time. I mean, tell me which congressman actually reads 1,400 pages? They don't. They sign off. This is what we have to understand as citizens. Whatever country you're from, I guarantee you it's the same. Your congressmen, your people working in the government are signing off on things they don't know. They don't have a fucking clue what's in them because they're 1,400 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this writer gave the president power to declare martial law and employ the armed forces, including the National Guard, in the event of a public emergency in order to restore public order. The pharmaceutical industry gained a lot out of this, as now in the case of any disease outbreak, the military can be called to safeguard their labs and drug supplies and impose quarantines. That was good news for Rumsfeld former company, Gilead Sciences. Does that name ring a bell?
No.
Remdesivir?
Oh, okay. Yeah, the drug that you
Gilead
were.
Sciences created Remdesivir.
Okay.
So Gilead Sciences, which owns the patent on a drug called Tamiflu that is used by everybody for the flu, and Gilead Sciences also made Remdesivir, which was used to murder people during COVID.
And I think that's the same. It's kind of like a hallucinogenic drug. I bet they program people with that too.
No. A Tamiflu might be, but Remdesivir just shuts your kidneys down in 10 days and kills you. That's just that simple.
Wow.
Yeah. What role did the pharmaceutical industry play in shaping this act? Probably 100%, but we don't know. What motivated the orchestrated coup d'etats over the past century, from Hawaii in 1893 to Iraq in 2003, and now the Gaza Strip and the Ukraine? There is a three-stage process that takes place. First, a US-based multinational corporation faces some kind of threat to its bottom line of profit by the actions of a foreign government demanding things like, oh my God, the company should pay taxes or observe labor laws or environmental laws. So then, secondly, the US politicians hear of this corporate setback and reinterpret it as an attack on the US, and they transform the motivation from an economic one to a political or geostrategic one. They make the assumption then that any regime that would bother an American company must be anti-American, dictatorial. Does that sound familiar? What are they calling Zelensky?
A dictator?
Hmm?
They call him I don't know.
Yeah, they're calling him a dictator.
Mm-hmm.
When all they want is all the minerals under his soil.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got to list. This is okay. So, right, this government must be anti-American, dictatorial, and probably the tool of some foreign power or interest that wants to undermine the U.S. Ha, right. Putin's at war with the Ukraine, right? The picture becomes so freaking clear when you got this information and nobody reads.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the third is when politicians now sell the need for intervention to the public, at which point it's not a broadly drawn struggle of good versus evil or a chance to free a poor oppressed nation. It is. At which point it now becomes a broadly drawn struggle of good versus evil.
Mm-hmm.
Or a chance to free a poor oppressed nation from the brutality of a dictatorship.
Hmm.
So much of US foreign policy is an exercise in mass projection in which a tiny self interested elite conflates its needs and desires with those of the entire world. This tendency has been especially pronounced in politicians who move from the corporate world into public office. For instance, John Dulles was a corporate lawyer for most of his life, representing some of the richest corporations in their conflict with foreign governments, and then he became FBI or CIA. I think the Dulles brothers were both CIA.
Mm.
Saddam did not pose a threat to U.S. security, but he did pose a threat to U.S. energy companies.
Hmm.
Because he had recently signed contracts with a Russian oil giant and was in negotiation with France, leaving the U.S. and British oil firms with nothing. There's the reason for that I went to Iraq, left my daughters,
Hmm.
right, for nothing. The third largest oil reserves in the world were slipping out of Anglo-American grasp, so his removal from power opened vistas of opportunities for the oil giant. Both Rumsfeld and Cheney were supposed to divest themselves of their corporate holdings when they took public office, but they didn't. They chose profit over public office. So since the Bush administration, the war profiteers aren't just clamoring to get access to the government, they are the government. There's no distinction between the two anymore.
Mm.
So wherever it has emerged over the past 50 years, from Santiago, Chile, to Moscow, to Beijing, to Bush's Washington, the alliance between a small corporate elite and a right-wing government has been written off as some sort of aberration. However, it's not an aberration. It's where the entire Chicago school crusade, with its triple obsessions, privatization, deregulation, and union busting, has been leading us. And that's where we'll stop tonight.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how shocking it is to find this, but how helpful to understand the world we're living in,
Oh, yeah.
connect more dots. It's just like, to me, this is filling up so many things that I already knew, but these details, little pieces of information, that so many things that I didn't know, really brings the image more clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, and that's really helpful, because sometimes you're talking to someone, you're doing something, and you kind of you have less pieces of information to defend a posture. Now we have more pieces of information to say, hey, the system is doing this. It's the absence of the sacred as a definition.
Right.
And are we going to just complain about it? Because
Right.
that's where, that's where many people stop. All of these people that are on, and I don't want to sound critical, but we have to be critical. So I'm not personally attacking anyone, but I see a lot of people that they can very well point out the problem, and they can very well speak about this, and they're very good at sharing information and analytics about what the system is doing, how it's operating, etc. But it's almost like they don't believe there's something beyond that. It's like, this is the edge, is knowing the system is wrong. That's, I've made it. But no, I mean, that's actually the first step in a long process of what are you going to do about it. All right, you can't just give up, because it's not like they give up. They just, yeah, the system is like that, and that's all there is to it, and I'm just going to become a YouTuber that records videos about it.
Yeah. Right.
Because, I mean, of course it's a valuable thing to inform others about it, but we've got to solve it. We cannot just stay there and not do anything.
And it's not up to the government. The government won't solve it for us. Trump is not the white savior.
And there's
He's a Chicago schoolboy. So is Elon Musk, through and through and through.
and
They
you give us
both.
so much information about how it's up to us, how it's our responsibility, how it's ourselves that buy the products, that follow the laws, that obey the laws, that actually believe in the laws and the system as if it was the God's law, as if it was a
Well,
sacred, and we're afraid of not putting the seatbelt on and things like that. We're afraid of and I'm not saying don't wear the seatbelt. I mean, but
well,
it's
but
it's interesting to see how we give our power away, and you talk about that all the time.
exactly. And with the seatbelts, I believe that's a whole nother hoax because what right what does it do? It gives them the power now to put us in jail, right? Create felons like they just did to Jaime. That's he has three felony DUIs that they're wanting him for.
Hmm.
Driving drunk, that's all. He hasn't damaged anybody's property, nothing.
Hmm.
He's had plenty of accidents, but it's only been himself and his vehicle, and he's still alive. So why the fuck do we care that he drives drunk?
Hmm.
So, well, he could kill somebody. Well, he hasn't, right? Same thing with the seatbelt. So they give these things to us to say it makes us so much safer. Really, how much safer does it make us?
No,
Really,
that's
truly.
that's exactly what I was talking about. The how we give our power like that, because you don't realize how much more dangerous the world is because you're doing that, because you're believing that's a good thing when it's not. It's you're at risk of getting screwed by the day that you went to. Everybody goes and has some drinks at some party at some dinner, and of course you got to
Yeah,
drive back home, and you're the real risk is you getting screwed by a cop. That's a,
exactly,
that's a,
exactly. You know, and to go to the seatbelt. I used to, being a nurse, I used to be like, oh yeah, 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 need to. I was strict on that with the girls when they were growing up, and now Alexis is thinks I'm stupid for not wearing my seatbelt. Um, like I'm not going to let the government fucking dictate to me to wear my seatbelt, because now that I know that everything that they've put forward, like
Mhm.
salt is bad for you, when actually the reality is, and they did a study in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and people that took 6 to 9,000 milligrams of salt a day
Mhm.
are the healthiest people ever. But yet we're steadily dying of heart disease and stuff because we're not taking in enough salt. So that's a blatant lie, right?
Hmm.
Cholesterol is bad for you, another blatant lie.
That's
I mean,
mhm.
everywhere you turn, there's a blatant lie. So what's the blatant lie underneath there? You know, without a doubt, there's a blatant lie under the seatbelts.
Hmm.
It doesn't save lives. It's a money making thing.
Hmm.
That's all it is.
Okay. Wow. So so we're gonna continue this in the absence of the sacred journey.
Yes. Next week is the erasing of Iraq, which had me
Okay.
who oh just
Maybe
like
you
I
can.
said, like I posted on Facebook, it was just another episode of the book Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee.
Oh wow! And I didn't get see. I see some posts. You know, Facebook is so good at having others not see your publications.
Well, you liked it. I
I
posted
did.
a couple weeks ago and said,
Oh, okay. So it's not
right,
recent.
and then at the end I put, I will no longer tolerate this. Who will stand with me? And nobody.
Because
I just got
I
likes.
recently, no, but it's doing that. I just discovered like a few weeks ago that you're like a friends of someone. You of course exchange chat or whatever with that person. It's supposed to be one of the persons inside your inner circle of 15 persons. But not even within that circle, Facebook will show each single post from that person in your feed. If you
Yeah.
want to see somebody's publications, you have to go into their page. It will not show up in your feed. The feed has become just more and more publicity of other things.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
you're going to miss it. If you think that by publishing something on Facebook, somebody else is going to see it, it's not. Only
Yeah.
if it, by some luck of the chance, somebody gives it enough people like it, and then it picks up, oh, this is something that everybody should see. Of course, it has shadow banning or their algorithms, of course, are cherry picking what everybody gets to see and what it hides. So it's really a means to change to program minds, people's
Yeah.
minds. It's I'm so sick of Facebook. It's so bad. It's like, why wouldn't I see that? I would have,
Yeah.
and it's happened to me, to everyone. They don't see my publications, and like, I published it. No, I didn't see it. Didn't show up on my feed.
Yeah.
It's
It's
like,
crazy.
okay, so we will continue. You're gonna share probably some things about what you experienced there. It's a first-hand experience, and it's gonna be very, very interesting. For next week, 7 o'clock, same time.
Well, we are undergoing time change on Sunday, so
Okay.
you aren't. You lucky bastards in Mexico aren't.
Yeah, we got to at least get rid of that one.
So let's
Although,
put it to. It'll be. Can we make it 7:15 your time, 8:15 Central Standard Time?
okay,
Because I need time to feed that
sure
way,
thing.
right?
Okay, so 8:15 now with the coming time change
Yeah.
in Central Standard Time. Check if you're from another country, because I also discovered that time changes depends on what country. So
Yeah.
check whatever time is going to be in your country. We had some live viewers today.
Did we?
Yeah, so it was so that's cool. That's pretty cool. So if somebody else wants to catch this live, make sure it's you know what time it is, and that's not easy anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for being here, and we will see you next week. And I Need Living Conversations, please visit the website aloha.com. You'll find links everywhere, and you'll find us everywhere if you look for us, because the system is not gonna put us there for you to see. You have to be on the path to find us. Thank you for being here. So see you next week.